The first time Ethan Cole met her, she humiliated him in front of a room full of people, and she didn't even look sorry. The glass doors of the Whitmore Foundation slammed shut behind him as laughter rippled through the marble lobby. Ethan stood frozen, his 5-year-old daughter Lily clutching his hand, her small fingers trembling as she stared up at him with wide, confused eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "why was that lady so mad?" Ethan swallowed the heat burning in his chest. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't, because the woman inside, dressed in a sharp black suit, chin lifted like a crown, was known all over the city as the rudest billionaire in town. And she had just crushed him without a second thought. Margaret Whitmore was a legend, but not the kind people admired. She was brilliant, ruthless, and rich beyond imagination. Her late husband had built an empire of steel, real estate, and technology, and when he died suddenly, Margaret took over with an iron grip. She expanded the fortune, doubled it, and along the way earned a reputation for reducing grown men to silence with a single glare. People said she had ice in her veins. That she treated charity events like battlegrounds. That she never smiled unless someone else was losing. Ethan knew all of this when he came to the foundation that morning. He had rehearsed his words a dozen times, standing in front of the bathroom mirror before waking Lily for school. He hadn't wanted to come, but desperation has a way of pushing pride aside. 6 months earlier, Ethan's wife, Nora, had died in a highway accident on her way home from a late nursing shift. One moment, she was promising to bring home takeout. The next, a state trooper was standing at Ethan's door, hat in his hands, eyes heavy with words that would shatter everything. Since then, Ethan's life had become a balancing act between grief and survival. He worked as a high school history teacher during the day and delivered groceries at night. Bills stacked up like silent threats. Lily needed speech therapy after withdrawing into herself, and the insurance barely covered half of it. The Whitmore Foundation offered grants for families in crisis. Ethan hoped, that if he could just explain, if he could show that he wasn't lazy or reckless, just broken and trying, someone would listen. Instead, Margaret Whitmore herself had walked into the meeting. She didn't sit. She didn't ask his name. She skimmed his application, her manicured nails tapping against the paper like a ticking clock. "A teacher," she said flatly. "Widowed. 2 jobs. Asking for assistance." Ethan nodded. "I'm not asking for charity," he said carefully. "Just temporary help. My daughter." Margaret looked up then, eyes sharp and cold. "Everyone who walks in here says that. Do you know how many stories I hear every day?" He felt Lily squeeze his hand tighter. "I know you're busy," Ethan said, voice steady despite the knot in his throat. "But my wife died 6 months ago. I'm doing everything I can. I just need. Margaret cut in. That word again. She finally sat, folding her arms. "Mr. Cole, grief does not entitle you to my money. Life is hard. People die. If I handed out checks to every sad story, this foundation would be bankrupt." A murmur had spread through the room. Staff members avoided Ethan's eyes. Something in him snapped, not into anger, but into clarity. "I'm not entitled," he said quietly. "And I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking for help so my daughter doesn't grow up thinking the world turns its back when you're at your weakest." Margaret stared at him for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then she stood. "This meeting is over," she said. "Security will escort you out." And just like that, he was gone. Outside, the autumn wind cut through Ethan's jacket. He knelt in front of Lily, forcing a smile as best he could. "It's okay," he told her. "We'll be okay." But as they walked away, his heart felt heavier than it had since the day Nora died. What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that Margaret Whitmore had stood at that same kind of crossroads years earlier, and the memory of it was the very thing she ran from every day. Margaret returned to her office, closing the door harder than necessary. The city skyline stretched before her, glittering and distant. She loosened her collar, annoyed by the tightness in her chest. She told herself the man had been weak. That letting emotions sway her decisions was how empires fell. That compassion was a luxury she couldn't afford. And yet, the image of the little girl's eyes followed her. Not crying, just confused. Margaret poured herself a drink, though it was barely noon. "Ridiculous," she muttered. That night, she dreamed of rain and broken glass. Of a man standing in the road, shouting her name. Of herself, younger and shaking, begging for help that never came. She woke before dawn, heart racing. 2 weeks passed. Ethan struggled on, swallowing rejection after rejection. He sold his wedding ring to pay for Lily's therapy. He skipped meals so she wouldn't have to. Every night, after she fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and talked softly to Nora's photograph, asking her how to keep going. Then, one afternoon, Lily fell sick at school. High fever, breathing shallow. The hospital bill that followed was more than Ethan made in 3 months. He stared at the numbers until they blurred. For the first time, fear outweighed pride. With shaking hands, he wrote one final letter, not to the foundation, but directly to Margaret Whitmore. He didn't beg, he didn't accuse, he simply told the truth. He wrote about Nora, about Lily's laugh before it faded, about teaching kids history while wondering how he'd make it to tomorrow, about standing in her office and feeling small, but refusing to let his daughter see him afraid. I don't expect a response, he ended. I just needed you to know that some of us aren't looking for handouts. We're looking for hope. He mailed it and forgot about it, because forgetting was easier than waiting. Margaret received the letter on a gray morning, slipped among contracts and financial reports. She almost tossed it aside. Almost. She read it once, then again. By the 3rd time, her hands were trembling. She stood abruptly and walked to the window. Down below, people hurried through the streets, each carrying burdens she'd never bothered to imagine. For the first time in years, Margaret felt ashamed. Her husband, Charles, had died alone in a hospital room while she was in a board meeting, choosing profit over presence. She'd told herself it was necessary. That emotion made you weak. But reading Ethan's words cracked something open. She ordered a background check, not to disqualify him, but to understand him. What she found only deepened the ache. No debt before Nora's death. Consistent work history. Community service. A man who gave more than he took. Margaret canceled her afternoon meetings. She drove herself across town to a modest apartment complex with peeling paint and a broken gate. She sat in the car for several minutes, heart pounding like it hadn't in decades. Finally, she knocked. Ethan opened the door, confusion flickering across his face. "You," he said softly. Margaret Whitmore stood there, without her entourage, without her armor. Just a woman in a gray coat, eyes tired. "I owe you an apology," she said. Silence stretched between them. "For what?" Ethan asked, though they both knew. "For being cruel when you were brave,"